We found out that there is a man by the name of Elimelech. He's married to Naomi. They have two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. There's a famine in the land, and Elimelech learns that across the Jordan, east of the Jordan, there isn't a famine. So he decides to move his family to the country of Moab. And as we've studied that, we've noticed that he seems to be a godly man, and that he has every intention of bringing his family back to the land of Bethlehem once the famine's over. While he's there, Elimelech dies. His sons marry two Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth. After they've been there some 10 years, both of the men die. So now we have three women. They're all widows. They have no way to provide for themselves. Naomi hears that God has lifted the famine in Bethlehem, and she makes the decision, I'm going to return home. She encourages her two daughter-in-laws to remain there in Moab among their people, to go back to their families where they have the best chance of finding a husband. Orpah does that. But Ruth goes with Naomi back to Bethlehem. When they arrive in Bethlehem, people recognize Naomi, but they think she looks different. 10 long, hard years have weathered her. And she even says, don't call me Naomi anymore, call me Mara, which we know means bitterness, right? All of that time has made her very bitter. While they're there, Ruth decides to glean, if you will, to utilize maybe the Old Testament system for helping people in need, kind of like a welfare system, and she ends up in the field of Boaz. And Scripture says, oh, by the way, he's a relative of Naomi through Elimelech, and he just happens to be single. Boaz notices her, and he takes, if you will, the idea of I'm going to be her protector. He shields her from the other workers. He gives her a place to work and actually makes her work a lot easier on her. And he provides food for her every day, food for her and her mother-in-law, Naomi. Now, Ruth will work for Boaz through both the barley and the wheat harvest. And we see in all of this that there's something else at work too. He's referred to as their kinsman redeemer. So in other words, he's a relative that will be able to help Naomi maybe hold on to her property. So that's where we are up to this point through the first two chapters of Ruth. And as I was looking ahead today and thinking about how to approach this text, I noticed that there are marriage customs that you and I in this culture aren't used to. So I put those marriage customs in your bulletin this morning, but I want to read through them with you because they're so different. And getting a working knowledge of this will help you toward the end of the sermon today and really help you next week as we look at how this plays out. So let's put those up. At this point in history, there are three stages of marriage in the Bible. So stage one is called the signing of the ketubah, which is a contract that creates the marriage bond. The bride would choose her husband, and her father would sign a legal contract with him called the ketubah. Once the contract is signed, the couple is 100% married, but they do not consummate the marriage at this point. It wasn't uncommon for parents to arrange marriages at a very young age for their children. So that's step one. Step two, called the chuppah, the consummation of the marriage. This may not occur for as long as 7 years. This is the time for the groom to raise the money as set aside or set out in the contract. Once he has raised the money, he notifies the father of the bride, who then sets a date to consummate the marriage at the bride's home. The bride's maidens and the groom's companions wait outside the chuppah room while the marriage is being consummated. They are witnesses that the marriage is consummated. Now, stage three, the wedding feast. After consummation, the entire wedding party walks to the house of the groom in a procession for a wedding feast. The wedding feast completes the ancient ritual of marriage. Now, if you want an example of this, you could turn to Genesis chapter 4 and look at how the marriage of Isaac and Rachel plays out. That's in Genesis chapter 24. Now, I'm not telling you anything new. When you look at what goes on here, this is really strange, right? Completely different than what we're accustomed to. But here's the interesting thing. If you have some spare time and not a lot to do, maybe Google marriage customs in our culture. And you're going to find that the marriage customs that we have today differ greatly from what they were in the colonial days. And I think you'll even find that those marriage customs have changed a lot in the last 50 years. What's consistent here and consistent with us today is what God's requirements are for marriage. And we'll look at that as we go through our text. All right. With that in mind, let's take a look at our first passage for today. One day, Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, Ruth, my daughter, should I not try to find a home for you, where you will be well provided for? Is not Boaz, with whose servant girls you have been, a kinsman of ours? So, Naomi's looking at where they are. The barley harvest is about over. The wheat harvest is going to begin. Someone has been making really good use of her property while they've been away. So she knows that at the end of the harvest season, she'll get that property back. And that's when Naomi will have the ability to sell that property. And what she gets for that property is going to be basically the security for how she will live in the coming years. As she looks at this, she thinks about her situation and how she's going to deal with this. Remember, there's a law that's in place that a widow can sell her property, and if she has a male son or a male heir, and when that child becomes of age, she can buy that property back. Naomi looks at herself. She's way past the childbearing years, so she knows that's not possible for her. But for Ruth, it's still a possibility. And the fact that she was married to Mahlon, and she's now a widow of him, if she were to remarry, that marriage might produce the male heir that she needs. So as Naomi looks at Boaz as a kinsman redeemer, she's thinking maybe, just maybe, Boaz is the guy to provide that heir for her so she can reclaim her property. Now, as you look at this part right here, it might be easy to say that Naomi is really just concentrated on herself. She's only worried about herself. But I don't think that's the case. If we go back to chapter 1 and look at what she said to her daughter-in-laws, may the Lord show kindness to you. And she's talking about both Orpah and Ruth. As you have shown to your dad and to me, may the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband. Then she kissed them and they wept aloud. We talked about how they had developed a relationship. It's clear that these two women love each other. So Naomi is looking out for a lot of things. She's certainly looking out for herself. She's also looking out for Ruth, but she's also looking out for her family because she knows that God wants this property to stay within her family. That's the reason they received it. Now, if you look at Naomi's plan, it seems to me she has two obstacles here. If Boaz is going to be the redeemer. First of all, Boaz is not first in line to redeem this property. There's somebody that's ahead of him, and we'll meet that man next week. Second of all, Boaz has been very generous to Ruth up to this point, but going to the level of marriage, that really takes it up a notch. So as I look at that, that's the two challenges that Naomi is facing with this plan. So let's look at what happens. Tonight, he, Boaz, will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash and perfume yourself and put on your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor. But don't let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go over and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do. Now be honest, all right? This seems a little strange, doesn't it? Seems very foreign to anything we do. But I'm going to challenge you, look at the way Naomi approaches this. As I read this, it seems to be very monotone. Almost like she's got a checklist that she's reading off of. And the impression that I get, especially when I look at Boaz's reaction to this later on, is while this seems really weird to us, this is pretty standard, if you will, in their culture for that day. So we'll take a look at what this means. Now, look at this phrase here. Wash and perfume yourself and put on your best clothes. When you read that, did that grab your attention? What do you think it means? There are commentators that have different ideas. Some would say that what she's saying here is telling Ruth to dress seductively. Remember how we talked about that, how culture tells you that if you want to get a man's attention, you need to dress this way? As I look at this, I just don't think that's possible. If we look at the way Naomi lives her life and the way that Ruth lives her life, these are both godly women, so I don't think that's what that means. Others think that maybe up to this point, Ruth has had mourning clothes on. Remember, she's lost her husband. They dressed differently during that time while they mourned their husband. And so Naomi's saying, take your mourning clothes off and put on regular clothes so that Boaz will know you'll be open to a proposal. I guess that's possible. But as I look at this, I think it's something different. I think this is just good, practical advice. Think about this. Boaz has seen Ruth. He sees her every day. But where does he see her? When she's out in the field, hot, sweaty, dirty, and I'll say it, maybe stinky, right? Now Naomi wants Boaz to see Ruth at her best. I think as I look at that, that's probably what's going on here. Naomi's just giving good advice. Now, the body harvest is over. And it's interesting to me that Naomi says, here's what you need to do and here's where you need to go. She says, I know that Boaz is going to be on the threshing floor. Now, the threshing floor is where they would take the grain and separate it from the stalk. And in fact, she says, I even know that he's going to be there all night. How could she possibly know that? You ever thought about that when you read through this story? I think what Naomi is, again, being very practical. It's been 10 years. Boaz has worked really hard to get this crop in. Probably there's a lot of poverty in the land at this time, and Boaz is going to be there that night to protect his investment, to guard his grain from would-be thieves, and Naomi's smart enough to know that. Now, there's another, I guess you'd say, strange phrase in here. It's uncover his feet. Again, the commentators are divided on this. Some believe that it literally means that, just to uncover his feet. There are others who believe, based on their research, that it means to uncover Boaz from the waist down. Again, as I looked at this story, Boaz is a godly man, Ruth is a godly woman. I don't think that's what it means. But either way, whether it's from the waist down or from the feet down, Boaz will know what's going on because it's a part of their culture. That's as much as I can glean from this. Now, look at Ruth's answer. I will do whatever you say. When I read that, that's very striking to me. I will do whatever you say. Here's why. Are you familiar with the way the Harvest Festival worked when it was harvest time? If you want a good example of this, go back, write this down in your notes if you want to look at it. Go back to Genesis chapter 38 and look at the story of Judah and Tamar. What you're going to see is harvest time was a festive time. And sometimes people in this culture would abuse that. It was a time for them, as you're going to see, to get drunk. And for others, it would even be a time of promiscuity. So, if you look at Ruth's answer here, I think it's amazing. Think about it. She's not only a foreigner, she's a Moabite. They have a bit of a reputation, maybe of even being a little loose. It wouldn't surprise anyone to find out that a Moabite living among the Hebrews was a prostitute. To me, Ruth would know this. So the fact that she comes back with that statement, I'll do whatever you say, tells me she's, using an awful lot of trust. She has trust in her mother-in-law to give her a good advice. She has trust in Boaz, a man of God, but most importantly, she has trust in her Lord, who will be with her and walk with her and guide her. Now, I do see that trust coming from Naomi to Boaz in this statement here. Boaz will tell you what to do. That tells me that she believes that Boaz will act in a godly manner. Okay, so everything's set up for this night. Here's what happens. So Ruth went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Now, this is not that different than what happens in our own culture. How many of you have ever had a long day? I mean, a really long day at work. That happens, right? Sometimes at the end of a long day, you might walk up to your refrigerator and maybe pull out a beer. Or pour a glass of wine, or maybe even a glass of whiskey. Or you're out in the yard, you're mowing, it's hot. You go in at the end of that and you grab a beer. It's not that uncommon, right? That's what's going on with Boaz here. It's been a long harvest season. He's worked all day and he's ready to relax. Scripture even tells us that alcohol is a gift of God. Look at what it says. Wine that gladdens the heart of man. In other words, alcohol can relax you. But alcohol can also be abused. In fact, it's something that can cause us to sin and even throw away our faith. Look at these words here. Do you not know that the wicked will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived. Neither thieves, nor greedy, nor drunkards will inherit the kingdom of God. God gave us alcohol to use, but not to abuse. So as I look at this here, I think Boaz, again, hard harvest season after a long drought. He's worked hard all day. He's eaten a big meal. He's had a glass of wine or beer. They had beer in this day. And he's relaxed and he's ready for a very peaceful night's sleep. That's what he thinks is going to happen. Something else comes up. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man. He turned and discovered a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. Now, I don't know about you, but I can empathize with Boaz. I've been startled and woken up in the middle of the night. Usually, right, Susan, when that happens to me, I'm not exactly coherent, right? But not Boaz. He just simply asked the question, "Who are you?" He doesn't panic. As I look at Boaz, man, this is one cool customer, right? Look what Ruth does. "I am your servant Ruth," she said. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a kinsman redeemer." Again, when I look at these words, Ruth never stops to amaze me. Look at what she does here. She very calmly responds when she has put herself in a very risky position. I would say what Ruth does here is determined and bold, very bold. The expression, "I am your servant Ruth," communicates a lot to Boaz. She's saying to him, "I am now, as I have been in the past, in your debt." She's acknowledging to Boaz, "You've been my protector. You've kept me safe in the field. You've given me a place to work. You've made sure that I have plenty to eat. You've even made sure that my mother-in-law has had plenty to eat. You have been very generous with your means in supporting me. Thank you for being my protector." I think that's all wrapped up into those words there. Now, this statement here, "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a kinsman redeemer," may not seem like much, but again, this is a very bold statement. If you look at this culture, she's just made a marriage proposal to Boaz with those words. I'll give you another example of that. This conversation that I'm going to share with you from Ezekiel is a conversation between the Lord and his people, and he's going to actually use the word Jerusalem to refer to his chosen people. So let me read that for you. "Later I, the Lord, the God of free and faithful love, passed by. And when I looked at you, Jerusalem, my chosen people, and saw that you were old enough for love, I spread the corner of my garment over you and covered your nakedness. I gave you my solemn oath and entered into a covenant with you, declares the sovereign Lord. You became mine." So this passage talks about how God takes his chosen people as his bride. So what's happened here between Boaz and Ruth is asked him for, if you will, to be married. Now, as I'm looking at this passage and I think back to what the conversations that have gone back and forth between Ruth and Boaz and the things specifically that Boaz has said to Ruth, I think there's a little something else at play here. And I'm going to put these words back up for you. This is the prayer that Boaz prayed for Ruth when he first met her. "May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." When you think about that prayer and then this phrase here, "You are a kinsman redeemer," I think Ruth is saying exactly what we talked about in week 1 and week 2. She's saying, "Boaz, do you realize You could be the answer to the prayer that you prayed for me. You could be that protector that you're asking God to provide. I see that all in these words now. So, let me ask you, when you look at this relationship that she's proposing here, do you understand what Ruth is actually asking for? Again, I know this is culturally different for you and me. Ruth is a Moabite. So that means she's a part of that culture that was banned from the congregation of Israel for 10 generations. They have a bad reputation. Foreigners don't necessarily fit very well in Israel's culture, right? They're not easily accepted. Ruth is saying, I want you, Boaz, to change my status from an outsider, a foreigner, a Moabite, and make me the mistress of your house, and make me an heir of the Messianic promise in the line of the Messiah. That's a pretty big, I guess you would say, that's a pretty big request, right? She's asking Boaz a lot. So here's what I want to do. I'm going to throw this next phrase up on the screen. I want you to read this aloud with me, okay? We haven't done this together. We're going to try this today. I want you to read this phrase aloud with me this morning, and I want you to really think about what these words say. Are you ready? It's okay if people hear you read aloud, right? Okay, here we go. The Lord bless you, my daughter, Boaz replied. Do you understand what he's saying there? Look at those words closely. He's done it before. Do you see what he's doing? He's praying for Ruth. Look at those words. The Lord bless you, my daughter. Think of the impact of this for just a second. The first thing Boaz does when he's faced with a marriage proposal, something that's going to completely change his life, what does he do? He brings God into the middle of that relationship. May the Lord bless you, my daughter. Now, put yourself in Ruth's shoes for just a minute. Can you imagine for just a moment the relief that she feels? Boaz could have rejected her. He could have made fun of her. He could have taken advantage of her. And he doesn't do any of that. Instead, what does she see in those words? She sees a man of God. A man who makes that real and brings that immediately into that relationship. I think that's amazing. All right, look at this next passage. Oops.
What?
I've managed to lock my clicker. Hang on here, see if I can unlock it. There we go. You made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether rich or poor. This is extremely high praise, especially this phrase here. He even points this out. Last kindness greater than the first. When Boaz first met Ruth, he praised her. He prayed for her. He recognized how loyal she had been to her mother-in-law and how she had also been faithful to God's people. But when he looks at her now, he sees even more. Ruth not only has concern for God's people, but she has concern and holds in high regard God's commands and his commands to protect widows and those in need. So, when you look at Ruth, you get this impression, at least I do when I read through this, that she's probably very beautiful. She's clearly a lot younger than Boaz. But none of that matters to her. What she's interested in, and you see it in these words, she brings to mind kinsman redeemer. Her focus is how she can serve her Lord and help her family. Again, I just see Ruth as a woman of God, clearly over and over again in this story. So here's what happens. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All my fellow townsmen know that you are a woman of noble character. Now, that statement there, I will do for you all you ask, is a big deal again. Do you understand what it means? Do you catch what's happening here? He's just accepted her marriage proposal. And think about what's happened here. Both of them have given what? We use these words when we talk about marriage. Mutual consent. Openly and freely given. Right? When that happens, when you make that promise between you and God, with this statement, Ruth and Boaz are now married in God's eyes. That relationship that Ruth was asking for has just changed. So there's a big change that's fixing to happen. Now, as you look at this, I don't want you to miss this because we've spread this out now over 3 weeks. This is actually a picture of your Savior. Do you see that? It reflects the marriage between Christ and His church. Let me remind you of that passage from Paul's letter to the Ephesians. Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife as Christ is head of the church, His body, of which He is Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave Himself up for her, to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the Word, and to present her to Himself as a radiant church without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. Boaz, in our story here, is a picture of Christ, and Ruth is a picture of the church. So as you think about this, and you look at these words here, ask yourself, what does Ruth bring to this relationship? What does she bring to this relationship? Let's list it again. She's a foreigner. She's a widow. She's basically destitute, right? She brings virtually nothing to the relationship. So why would Boaz do this for Ruth? I can come up with only one answer. He loves her. Do you see how that's a picture of Christ and the church? When you were born into this world, who were you? You were a person with one personality, one nature. That nature is sinful. When you looked at God, whether you realized it or not, you said, I hate you. I want absolutely nothing to do with you. I am going to run from you. Jesus looked at you and me and said, I love you. That's why I'm coming into this world, because I love you. I am willing to do what it takes to buy you back. I know what that means. That means suffering God's punishment once and for all for sin, to take the full wrath of God for every sin on me. I'm willing to do that for you. And who is this? I mean, look at some of the words that describe Jesus in the Bible. He is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. He owns everything. Everything belongs to Him, and He loves you so much, He's willing to do that for you. I love the way Paul talks about this in his letter to the Romans when he writes, but God demonstrated His own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Jesus loves the unlovable. He loves you and me and every human being. His love for us is amazing. So as we look at this story, don't ever forget, while it's a story about relationships between people, most of all, it's a story about God's love for you and me and for every human being. Okay, back to the person-to-person relationship. This passage, right, or these words right here, you are a woman of noble character. That's what Boaz says to Ruth. Those words should be familiar to you if you did the homework for this week. Remember I talked to you about going back and looking at Proverbs 31? Let me remind you of that passage there. A wife of noble character, who can find? She is worth far more than rubies. In a relationship story like this, you're going to find things like this that, to me, as I look at this, that really stand out. So let me try to couch it this way. Ladies, I'm going to ask you a question. For those of you who are married, would your husband, be honest here, would your husband fight to protect your bank account? Do you think he would? I'm seeing a lot of heads going like that. My answer would be, of course I would, right? Why do I bring that up? If your husband is willing to fight for your bank account, he should be willing to fight for you. You see, whenever two people come together in a relationship, there's always going to be troubles. Oftentimes in relationships, troubles come around money. At other times, they come around anger. Sometimes they come around kids. They always come up because you have two sinners involved in a relationship. And at times in your marriage, maybe if it's like for you and it is for me, those things can seem almost insurmountable. But we can never forget that we have a Lord who's bigger than anything. A God who can overcome any problem, no matter how big it is. But, and there is a but, God expects His children to get in there and do the hard work of developing and growing that relationship. So ladies, if your husband tells you he loves you and he's not willing to fight for you, he's a liar. Because his actions do not match his words. That's important for you to remember. Because what you're getting ready to see is Boaz fight for Ruth. We'll get a small picture of it today, but a big picture of it next week. Here's another passage from Proverbs. A good name is more desirable than great riches. To be esteemed is better than silver or gold. What I want you to do as you think about this passage this morning, those of you who are married, think back to your wedding day. For those of you who aren't married, and maybe you're a widow or a widower, or maybe you're a kid who's never been married, think back to a wedding that you've been to, okay? We've all been to one at one point in our life, I think, most of us anyway. There's a point in that wedding ceremony right at the very beginning that is huge. I don't know if you've ever thought about this or not. It's when the father takes the hand of his daughter and places it in the hand of her soon-to-be husband, her future husband. Do you know what that symbolizes? Up until that point in her life, the father has been responsible for guarding the heart and protecting the relationship, the reputation of his daughter. At that moment in the service, the father is handing that responsibility off to that future husband. That's important. And if you look at this story here, and if you remember from week 1, that's what Boaz has been doing for Ruth. Guarding her heart and protecting her reputation since the very beginning. That's important in relationships. And ladies, don't settle for anything less from your husband. All right, let's look at this next passage. And now, it is true that I am a redeemer. Yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight and in the morning. If he will redeem you, good. Let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then, as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until morning. So she lay at his feet until morning, but arose before one could recognize another. And he said, let it not be known, here it is, let it not be known that a woman came to the threshing floor. And he said, bring the garment you are wearing, and hold it out. So she held it, and he measured out 6 measures of barley, and put it on her. Then he went into the city. You see what's happening here? The people of Bethlehem have gotten used to seeing Ruth come and go from Boaz's field, right? She's there every day gleaning, and when she leaves, she typically takes with her grain because she's worked for that, and Boaz is really generous. So on this morning, if someone happens to see her walking out of the threshing floor with grain in her hands or in her jacket, no one's going to suspect that she has been with Boaz all night. Again, we find him guarding and protecting her reputation. Now, as Boaz looks at this, there's a couple of things that he's facing. And if he wants to be able to help the family, he knows, first of all, that he's not first in line to redeem the property. So that means that Boaz is under no obligation at all to reclaim Naomi's property. But as you look at it here, he clearly wants to do that. He wants to restore Naomi's property for her. Again, as I look at this, he's a man of honor, and he's extremely generous with the blessings that God has given him. So here's what happens. When Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, "How did it go, my daughter?" Then she told her everything Boaz had done for her, and added, "He gave me 6 measures of barley, saying, 'Don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed.'" Then Naomi said, "Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens. For the man will not rest until the matter is settled today." Now, when you look at this, you get the impression that Naomi's been up all night, maybe biting her fingernails, right? Waiting in anticipation. What's going to happen? And what does she find out? Not just good news, but great news. Ruth tells her that Boaz hasn't just been thinking about me, he's been thinking about you too. Don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed. Again, Boaz is the answer to Naomi's prayer. He's the one that God is using to take all of that bitterness out of her life. So can you imagine Naomi now as she watches this play out? Imagine the encouragement this is for her to watch God fulfill his promise to answer her prayers. I can't even imagine how excited she must be to get this kind of news. Now, there's another phrase in here too that I think it's important for us to look at, where she says here, "For the man will not rest until the matter is settled today." When you think about that, how would you describe Boaz? When you think about it, I think she would say that Boaz is a man that's not only determined, but he clearly has a plan that he's not going to give up on. Does that remind you of somebody? Remember how I talk about pictures of our Savior in here? It should remind you of your Savior Jesus. Let's look at these words from Luke. As the time approached for him, Jesus, to be taken up to heaven, Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem. When Jesus came into this world, he had a single focus. Please don't forget this. It was you. Jesus knew you when he walked the face of this earth. He knew you in eternity, and he came to this world for one purpose: to redeem you, to buy you back from sin, death, and hell. And Jesus let nothing, absolutely nothing, stand in the way of doing that, even when it meant suffering the punishment for all sin. In other words, to endure hell on the cross. He did it for you. So that's where chapter 3 ends. So let's do some summary thoughts today. You haven't had any fill in the blanks. I saved them for the end. Here's your first one this morning. Purity paves the road to intimacy. Purity paves the road to intimacy. Now, I'm going to ask you a strange question. Play along with me, okay? I do have a point in asking you this. How many of you, Colton, I better see your hand, like fire? Yeah? I find fire. Yeah, there it is. Okay, there they are. There's a story behind that. Ask Mom and Dad. Fire is useful. When we lived in East Texas, we had a giant fire pit. I could throw logs in there. I could throw limbs in there. I could throw leaves in there, grass clippings, trash. I could burn it so that I didn't have to pay to have it hauled off. You know that you can roast hot dogs in there. You know that you can make s'mores in a fire, right? We all love s'mores. We did that out here. Who doesn't love s'mores? They're awesome, right? Fire is awesome as long as it stays within its boundaries. If you look at my fire pit, I had an area around it so that the fire couldn't get outside its limits. My son-in-law, Matt, is a volunteer fireman. Ask him how many lives are lost and how much property is damaged when fire gets outside of its boundaries. What's my point? Intimacy is a wonderful gift from our Lord, as long as it stays inside of God's boundaries. And those boundaries are the boundaries of marriage. When intimacy gets outside of those boundaries, innocence is lost. There are unwanted pregnancies. Relationships are destroyed. Self-esteem is destroyed. And families are destroyed. It's a gift that God gives us but it has limits on it. Now, when you look at this story here, we may not think about this, but when Ruth went down to that floor with Boaz, there was a real temptation for the two of them. A real temptation. It would have been easy for them to be intimate that night. But they didn't. Again, do you remember what Boaz did? He brought God into that relationship. He prayed for his possible future wife because he understood the gift that intimacy is when it remains in the boundaries of marriage. So, that I want you to hang on to that phrase. Purity paves the way to intimacy. Here's your last fill in the blank. Living by faith means that sometimes you take risks that honor God. Sometimes you take risks that honor God. So let me ask you, do you think it was a risk for Ruth to return to Naomi, to God's chosen people? Absolutely it was. Even though she was a believer, because of their own spiritual weakness, they could have rejected her. Do you think it was a risk for Ruth to go into the field of a stranger to glean, to gather grain for her and her mother-in-law? Absolutely it was. We saw how people picked on her. We also saw how her own mother-in-law warned her that she could have possibly been taken advantage of. It was absolutely a risk for her. Was it a risk for Ruth to go to that threshing floor that night with Boaz? It absolutely was. He could have rejected her. He could have taken advantage of her. Ruth put herself at risk for her Lord. How could she do that? Because she understood that she had a faithful Lord. She understood that she had a God who walks beside her and who protects her. So let's be honest again. God calls us to take a risk for Him. I talked to it with the kids this morning. God's given us one purpose, and that is to go out and share the good news of Jesus. What's the risk in doing that? People could be rude to you, right? People could make fun of you. People could ignore you. Let's be honest, you could even lose a friend or a family member sharing the good news of Jesus. That's the risk. But at times, God gives you an opportunity to be a part of something amazing when you share that good news. He uses your story about Jesus to work through and create faith in someone's life. At that moment, that person's life changes for eternity. They go from a blind, dead enemy of God to a dearly loved child of God who has forgiveness of every one of their sins and has eternal life in heaven. That's what God has called you and I to do. To risk being embarrassed, made fun of, to share the good news that we know and that we love. In other words, to talk about our best friend, Jesus. The story of Ruth is an amazing story. It has a lot about relationships. But the most important relationship, and I'm going to keep emphasizing that, is the one that God gave about His coming Son, Jesus. How does that play out, finally, in the story of Ruth? That's the story for next week. Amen.